Before we begin the story of how this dog always knew which toy was his, even after he was gone, I invite you to get comfortable. Let the world fade for a while. If you find yourself drawn into these quiet tales, feel free to like and subscribe. It helps more stories find their way to the firelight. Now, let's begin. They say there's a house on Appleseed Lane where the wind doesn't howl. It hums, as though whispering to someone just out of sight. The neighbors talk in low murmurs, not because they're frightened, but because speaking too loudly feels like it might break the spell. It's a small house, painted white with peeling shutters and ivy that never quite gives up, no matter how many times it's trimmed. But it's not the house people remember. It's the golden retriever who used to live there. Old, quiet, eyes like melted tea. They called him Humphrey, though no one remembers who said it first. And his toy box. A real one. Wooden, hand-painted years ago with curling vines and chipped stars. Inside, a collection of toys, ducklings, bones, a rope shaped like a pretzel crusted in years of dust and love. They weren't new. They weren't special. No tags. No glitter. No batteries or bells, but every single one belonged. If you picked up a toy and put it in the wrong spot, the dog would correct you. Not with teeth or growl. Just a nudge, a gentle paw. Even children learned not to question it. And here's the strange thing. The toys had no markings. Never initials or names scratched into seams. Some had been replaced over the years, others vanished without a trace. But always, the dog knew when something was his. And when it wasn't. People said it was training. But no one had ever seen anyone train him. Others claimed the toys smelled familiar. But even brand new ones, gifts, donations, unexpected deliveries? He'd ignore them, unless something unseen flickered in those old eyes of his. One woman once dropped a toy from her purse. A small felt mouse, meant for a cat. It tumbled into the toy box unnoticed. The next morning, it was outside, on the porch. Damp from dew, waiting gently on the welcome mat. Not here, it seemed to say. Not mine. Some say he slept with a lime green duck nestled under his chin, worn till its eyes were threadbare and one wing hung crooked. They say it was the first toy he ever found. Or maybe the first one that found him. But the oddest thing? Even after his heart went still, the toy box remained. Untouched, for a while. Then opened again when other dogs visited. And yet, certain toys were never touched. Volunteers said dogs acted like someone had already called dibs. Not in fear, not in anger, in quiet knowing, as if memory leaves a scent. Even after everything else fades. So maybe it's not that the dog remembered the toy. Maybe the toy remembered the dog. Or maybe, and this is only whispered on certain evenings, the toys remember being chosen. And just like stories, once something is chosen with love, it never fully lets go. The wind that night had a different voice, like it had stories to tell, if only someone would listen. The Bennett house, tucked just beneath the slope of Maple Ridge, glowed soft yellow in the dusk. Inside, birthday balloons swayed slightly in the warm draft from the furnace, and the scent of vanilla frosting floated through every room. Eliza sat cross-legged on the floor, her fingers still sticky from cake. Her eyes were wide behind round glasses, fixed on the blue plaid blanket in her father's arms. And something inside her stilled, as if she already understood that everything was about to change. The blanket shifted, and from inside it, two curious eyes blinked. A heavy nose twitched once. Then, with a quiet little grunt, he wobbled free, paws too big for his frame, ears like folded velvet. He blinked once at Eliza. Then, slowly, he padded forward. One paw at a time. Wobbly, uncertain, but straight, as if he'd been born knowing where to go. In the corner beneath the window stood a soft lime green duck, A gift from Aunt Moira, left unopened, unplanned, untouched. Meant to be just another toy. But the pup saw it. And like a compass needle to true north, he marched to it. Nudged it gently with his nose. Then laid down beside it, letting out a sigh that felt far too old for someone brand new. Eliza didn't speak. Not a word. She just reached out, touched his head. His fur was warm, his breath slow, and somehow, without names or introductions, they both understood. He was home. They named him that night. Not in a rush. Names, Eliza said later, should take their time. But when he sat with his head pressed to her knee, her mother smiled and whispered a name that tasted like oak leaves and warm tea. Humphrey. The sound seemed to fit. He didn't bark. Didn't bound, just blinked, then stretched a little closer into Eliza's side. From that first hour, it was clear, this wasn't just a pet meeting his family. It was something quieter, deeper, as if a thread, long lost, had been found again. And tied. The duck wasn't bright anymore. Its lime green was already softening, like leaves pressed between book pages. And yet, it shined in Humphrey's eyes. As if it glowed, faint and familiar. No one had told him it was his. No one placed it in his bed. It wasn't wrapped in ribbons or soaked in food. It had no name, no tag. But to Humphrey, it was different from the start. He carried it everywhere. Down the hallway, across the tiles, up onto the corduroy armchair in the corner of the living room. It went where he went, trailing behind his paw steps like a shadow stitched from thread and fluff. Eliza began to call it Feathers, though she always insisted it was Humphrey's idea. As if he'd whispered it to her, not with words, but with the kind of knowing you only feel in your chest. Like remembering a melody you've never heard. And Feathers became not just a toy, but a habit, maybe even a ritual. Each night, before settling in his bed, Humphrey would fetch it. Not in a rush. Not like play. Carefully, with his jaw loose and patient, he'd bring Feathers to the blanket near Eliza's door. And there, they'd sleep, the girl, the dog, and the memory they hadn't quite made but somehow always had. Season after season, Feathers remained soft, slightly sagging where time had done its tugging. But never bitten, never torn, never flung. Humphrey never chewed Feathers. He respected it, as though it was more than fabric, more than stuffing, as though he understood that some things aren't made to be destroyed, that some things hold pieces of us. Tiny invisible threads we can't name but dare not break. Sometimes, when guests visited and picked up Feathers, they'd chuckle. This one's seen better days, someone might say. But always, Humphrey would be there, watching. Not possessive, not wild, just present. If the toy was dropped anywhere but its usual corner, he would retrieve it once the guest had left, nose to floor, and bring it gently home, laying it in the place it belonged. Eliza once moved it deliberately to see what he'd do. She put it on a shelf, tucked between some books. Humphrey sat beneath it, staring. Not whining, not barking, just waiting. When she returned an hour later, she lifted it down without a word. He took it, turned, and walked away, like a shepherd collecting a scattered flock. And in time, no one moved Feathers without permission. The toy box was introduced later, polished wood with brass corners, gifted by Uncle Howard one Easter. Toys of every shape soon filled it, rubber bones, squeaky balls, a plush pretzel the size of a shoelace ring. But Feathers never stayed in the box. It lived outside it, beneath the window. In its place. Because some toys aren't just loved, they're remembered. Their shape, their weight, the feel of them between teeth held gently, the way some dreams are held. And Humphrey? Humphrey remembered. Birthdays became chapters, marked not by cakes or candles, but by new additions, toys wrapped in crinkly paper and tied with bows, handed to Eliza with squeals of joy and soft laughter. Each time, Humphrey would sit politely, watch her untie the ribbon, then wait. His tail might wag, his ears might twitch, but he never lunged. Each toy was offered to him like a gift from a friend he hadn't met yet. Sometimes he'd sniff it, give it an appraising nudge, then turn away without a second glance. Other times, he chose. And when he chose, you knew. Because it wasn't just picking up a toy. It was adoption, recognition. He'd lift it delicately, walk a pattern through the house, the hallway, the kitchen, the window's corner, then curl beside it in that slow, dignified way that said, "This one belongs." The toy box started to fill. A plush pig that squeaked like sunrise. A rope toy spun from threads of red and yellow. A soft dinosaur with stubby arms and kind eyes. They all went inside, but only some, only a precious few, ever left the box in Humphrey's mouth. Eliza tried once to tempt him with a bright, bouncing ball. It jangled with each toss. He blinked once, followed it with his gaze, but didn't move. Then, with quiet certainty, he walked to the toy box, dug gently with a paw until the fabric dinosaur emerged, and proudly carried it to the window as if declaring, "I've already chosen." And that was the quiet rule understood by all who knew him. He didn't hate the other toys. He wasn't possessive or rude. It wasn't about want, it was about knowing. Guests brought gifts for him. Local shopkeepers, kindly neighbors, even the mail carrier who once left a tennis ball with a note, "For the good boy with the wise eyes." Some found a place in his heart. Most didn't. And the ones that didn't? He never destroyed them, never shunned them. He'd simply leave them where they were found, or nudge them carefully back into the toy box. Untouched, unclaimed, waiting for someone else to come calling. Mrs. Bennet once joked that Humphrey had the manners of a museum curator, choosing only artifacts that told part of a tapestry only he could see. At times, the toys even mirrored the seasons. In summer, Humphrey favored a rubber sunflower, faded by sun and marked from years of mouthing. In winter, the felt snowman saw the light of day again, carried to the fireplace with slow, reverent steps. Patterns emerged, but none replaced feathers. Feathers stayed constant. The other toys, the ones he chose, came and went like chapters in a journal. Different, but necessary. Shared, but distinct. Still, the town began to whisper. About the dog with the old soul. About the toys he loved like memories disguised in plush. And some claimed, though no one ever proved, that once, when a duplicate toy showed up, one he already had, he chose the old one. Every time, even when newer, even when shinier. Eliza, a cousin once asked, "How does he always know?" But Eliza only smiled and said softly, "Because some things just belong. They don't need telling, they remember." And in the quiet of the toy box, beneath the faded lid and brass hinges, stories waited. For paws that understood. For the pull of something remembered. It was early spring when Mr. Holloway moved into the blue house next door, the one with the cracked birdbath and window boxes that had waited years to flower again. He was a quiet man, widowed some time before, with a cane that tapped softly and a laugh like velvet. But it wasn't Mr. Holloway that everyone noticed, not at first. It was Ginger. She was a wiry little terrier, all energy and angles, with eyes too curious for their own good. Her nails clicked across the porch like impatient thoughts, and more than once, she darted beneath the hedge before Mr. Holloway could call her back. But she never caused trouble. Not real trouble. Just the kind that makes you smile with your mouth closed. The first time she visited the Bennets, Eliza had just come home for the weekend, and Mrs. Bennet was making tea. Ginger came with, on a too long leash, bouncing through the rooms like she might uncover a secret if she just moved fast enough. And then, she found the box. The lid was already cracked open. Humphrey never minded, and with a delighted squeal, Ginger pounced. Squeaky toys squealed back. A rope toy was flung into the air. A blue ball found itself underfoot, rolling toward the curtains. Humphrey watched. He wasn't upset. He sat still, tail twitching once, as Ginger dove deeper into what to her must have felt like a dragon's hoard. And let her until she touched it. Feathers. She didn't bite, didn't tug, just nosed it, curious, as she had the others. And that's when Humphrey moved. Not fast, not loud, just forward. He stepped in front of her, slow and sure. And then laid a paw, soft, steady, on Ginger's shoulder. Just enough weight for her to stop moving. And wait. She blinked up at him, all confusion and tilt-headed wonder. But there was no bark. No growl. No teeth. Just Humphrey, eyes steady, posture calm, and something in the silence around him that felt stiller than usual. Ginger, after a moment, let Feathers be. She turned instead to the squeaky pig, which squealed delightfully beneath her teeth. Mr. Holloway chuckled from the kitchen. "She thinks everything belongs to her," he said, sipping softly. Eliza knelt beside Humphrey, whispering without words, brushing his fur with fingers that knew better than to praise. Some things didn't need praise. They just needed to be seen. After that, Ginger never touched Feathers again. She'd play with the rope, fetch the sunflower plush, pile 3 toys together into something like a fort, but Feathers she avoided. Not with fear, but with respect. Once, Eliza watched Ginger sniff toward the corner where Feathers always rested. She paused, considered, then turned and fetched the squeaky pig again. As if she, too, understood. Some nights, when Mr. Holloway and Ginger visited, the house filled with quiet warmth. The smell of chamomile and cinnamon. Toenails tapping against floorboards. And still, Humphrey sat by the window, Feathers tucked beneath his chin. Watching, welcoming, guarding, not against danger, but forgetfulness. Because even in the warmth of company, even in the joy of shared toys and soft light, there were things that were his. Chosen once. And never forgotten. The snow arrived early that year, like a secret whispered before it was welcome. It came soft at first, feathered drifts along the porch railings and tiny glaciers on the edges of each window pane. The world grew quieter beneath its hush. But in the house on Appleseed Lane, the quiet had a different weight. Eliza wasn't feeling well. It started with a cough that tucked into her throat and refused to leave. Then came restless sleep, pale skin, long afternoons where she didn't come downstairs. Mrs. Bennet said it was just exhaustion. Mr. Bennet said growing up wore you out faster than it should. But Humphrey knew better. He started bringing Feathers to her bedroom door every night. Always carefully. Sometimes with a soft whine if the door was too tightly closed. Other times with a kind of resigned silence, as though his hope were braced against something he couldn't name. When Eliza stopped answering, he kept trying. He'd lay the duck gently, just to the right of the doorframe, then lie down next to it, ears perked, waiting for footsteps that didn't come. Eventually, Mrs. Bennet would coax him away, but he'd return the next night. And the one after. When more toys joined the nightly lineup, no one told him to stop. One by one, he carried them from the toy box, the rope toy, the sunflower, the dinosaur, arranging them in a solemn procession outside her room. They lined the hallway like tiny soldiers, like sentinels of stuffing and stitches watching for miracles. Sometimes, he'd rest his chin on the last one, as though willing Eliza to return through the doorway at any moment. As though toys could summon the people they loved. And when the hallway fell into stillness, he'd wait just a little longer before padding back to the window, where Feathers would wait for him again when dawn came, tucked safely beneath his paw. The days blurred into hospital visits, bags packed with soft beeping things, and worried glances exchanged over teacups. And yet, Humphrey's routine never changed. Every evening, toys delivered. Every morning, toys tidied away, except for Feathers. He never moved Feathers. One day, Mrs. Bennet thought she heard him crying, not out loud, but deep, the kind of sound that lived in the bones of a creature who knows love like a memory. She found him curled by Eliza's door, nose against the duck, eyes closed. Not asleep, just quiet. There was a moment, just one, when she thought he looked human, in the way grief sometimes erases species. She didn't say a word, just sat down beside him on the floor, leaned her back against the door, and whispered, "She's trying to come back." He didn't move. The wind picked up again outside the window. It made the trees groan and the gutters whistle. But inside, all was still, save for the dog, the duck, and the silence between them. A week after Eliza was admitted, the house grew too quiet. Not the kind of quiet that rests, but the kind that weighs, with corners that echo and shadows that linger a little too long. Mrs. Bennet had begun sleeping lightly. Too lightly. Each creak in the floorboards caught her breath, each settling sigh of the house curled around her ears like unfinished thoughts. It was around midnight when she heard it. The unmistakable sound of footsteps upstairs. Not heavy, not sharp, light. Soft. Padded. A girl's steps. Not rushed, just moving. Purposeful. Mrs. Bennet froze, cup in hand, the tea long gone cold. She waited. More steps. A door creaked. There was laughter. A faint giggle. Just once. Then silence again, as sudden as a candle snuffed in wind. She rose slowly, feet wrapped in slippers too worn to echo, and moved to the foot of the stairs. Humphrey sat there already, watching up the steps. Not barking, not pacing, just watching. She placed a hand on the banister. "Did you hear it, too?" she whispered. Humphrey turned his eyes toward her, warm, unreadable, and then back to the hallway above as though his ears heard threads the rest of the world could not. Mrs. Bennet climbed halfway, enough for the hallway to come into view. Eliza's door was closed, but something in the air felt recently disturbed, like the room had just exhaled. Tentatively, Mrs. Bennet opened the door. The bed was untouched. The room dim, but familiar. Nothing out of place. Just the leftover hum of memory, faint and fading. She closed it again, slower this time, the doorknob cool beneath her fingers. Downstairs, the clock ticked once. Then again. And that night, perhaps the same hour, perhaps later, Humphrey picked up Feathers. He didn't go to the hallway. He didn't curl at the door. Instead, he wandered carefully into Eliza's room and climbed onto the edge of her bed, his joints slow, his breath steady, and placed the duck beside her pillow. Then, nose to blanket, chest rising in rhythm with the far-off wind, he laid down and closed his eyes. There, where her scent still lingered. Where hope hadn't yet left the linen. And where, for just a moment, it didn't feel like he was alone. The moonlight turned silver on the floorboards. The house murmured softly in its sleep. And the duck, threadbare, one-winged, and silent, kept its vigil, as it always had. The crocuses came first. Tiny purple tongues pushing through the snow like secrets learning how to speak. Mrs. Bennet said it meant spring had remembered them, even after such a cruel winter. They brought Eliza home just as the blossoms began to bloom. She was smaller than before. Paler. Hair tucked beneath a knit cap, arms wrapped in a coat that suddenly seemed too big. But her eyes, those gentle, knowing eyes, were still hers. The front door creaked the way it always had. And just beyond it, lined like a breadcrumb trail of hope, lay toys. Feathers first, then the rope toy, then the plush sunflower and the saggy dinosaur. All carefully placed, one after the other, like gifts waiting in silence. Eliza paused. Her mother's hand hovered gently at her back, but she didn't need the guidance. Her eyes followed the path. She smiled, and then he was there. Humphrey didn't bark, didn't rush forward. He stood a few feet away, still and trembling slightly in the legs. Age, maybe. Worry, maybe more. Their eyes met. A single breath passed. Then he moved, slow and reverent, stepping over his own lineup of offerings until he reached her feet. He didn't nuzzle or leap. He simply looked up, then turned, picked up Feathers with careful teeth, and carried it to the window. There, he settled, curling gently, placing the duck beside his paw, tail thumping once on the floor. As if to say, "You are here. And so am I." Eliza knelt beside him. She didn't speak, afraid her voice might crack something open that she wasn't yet ready to spill. Instead, she wrapped her arms around him and pressed her forehead to the top of his head. He let out a long sigh, deep and warm, and closed his eyes. Somewhere behind her, her parents watched. Holding hands, not speaking. The moment didn't ask for words. The air carried a faint scent of melting snow and cranberries, the stale corner of winter packed beneath leafless hedges. But inside, everything felt softer. Timed. Returned. Later that night, Eliza found her old blanket and lay it near the fireplace, just like when she was young. Humphrey came without calling. He brought Feathers. Together, they lay in the hush between fire crackle and quiet breath, the duck a soft weight between them, threadbare, unchanged. No explanations passed between girl and dog. Only memory, and presence, and that odd, lasting sense that something deeply broken had, for now, held. The seasons turned like quiet pages in a book long memorized. Summer melted into autumn, cool air brushing golden leaves and turning the window's corner into a patch of light that shifted with the hour. Winter came with its hush and firelight, and spring unearthed the buried scent of earth and lilac. Each time Eliza returned, sometimes with gifts, sometimes just stories, Humphrey greeted her with something slower than a wag. A soft lift of the eyes, a nudge of feathers, the tired joy of something known too deeply to ever startle. Time touched him, first in the way he stood, slower, deliberate. Then, in the way his hearing softened, how he began to tilt his head, just slightly, when someone spoke. But nothing touched the knowing. Even as toys came and went, brought by visiting cousins, new neighbors, and later, the children of friends, the rule remained unshaken. The toy box sat beneath the window. Its brass corners dulled, lid always slightly ajar. And still, Humphrey knew which toys belonged to him. Even when nearly identical. A green ball might arrive, same size, same bounce, but if it wasn't the one he remembered, he'd let it be. A frayed rope, replaced unknowingly by a well-meaning guest, would languish untouched while the older, more worn one remained cradled beneath his paw. Nothing had labels. Nothing had names pinned to it. But he knew. Once, a neighbor's child asked if dogs believed in ghosts. Eliza only smiled, kneeling beside the toy box. "I think some memories live longer than they should," she said, brushing her fingers over the plush dinosaur, its tail now half stuffed and limp. "And some never fade at all." When she moved away for good, her own apartment, too many books, no pets allowed, Humphrey watched her pack. He didn't follow her to the car. Instead, he stood in the doorway, feathers clutched gently between his teeth. She knelt beside him, again. "You'll be all right," she said. "You've always known how to remember." He didn't bark, just laid the duck down neatly, then touched his nose to her sleeve. Months passed. She visited often. Her scent remained in certain blankets. But the days turned quieter. The afternoons stretched longer. The sun moved differently across the floors. Still, he would select his toys. Not distractedly, not out of habit, but with the same reverence he always had. Sometimes feathers, sometimes the dinosaur, once even the squeaky sunflower, which barely made a sound anymore. Eliza's parents sometimes moved things while cleaning, dusting old corners, reorganizing the lean shape of their home, and always, within the hour, the toys were found back in their places. Feathers beneath the window. The pig curled against the fireplace tiles. The toy box was no longer full. Some toys had worn through entirely. Others had quietly disappeared over the years, tucked into donations or offered to dogs who visited briefly. Yet even then, only the unchosen left. Only the ones he never claimed. The rest, the ones he carried, the ones he guarded quietly with eyes more clouded than before, they stayed. Together, they formed a kind of map. Not of places, but of moments. Of knowing. Of the stretch of years that passed through soft pause and softer silences. And always, always, Humphrey remembered. April came soft that year, like it was apologizing for how long it had been away. The violets arrived first, tiny bursts of purple threading through the grass like secrets too small to shout. The wind lost its bite, and the sun started lingering on the Bennett porch just a little longer each twilight. Humphrey was 13. His fur had lightened to the color of antique lace. His eyes, once molten amber, had grown cloudy at the edges, tea left too long on the windowsill. The bounce in his gait was gone, traded for a gentle sway. But when he walked, he still moved with purpose. With grace. As though every step counted. The toy box had thinned by then. Fewer toys, softer edges. But feathers remained, right where he'd always been, in the patch of sun beneath the window, slightly faded, one wing stitched and restitched, a little flatter each season. Humphrey still touched the duck often. Not to play, not to carry, just to check, to remember. Some mornings, he would nose it twice, then curl back into himself, his breath slow and even. Some evenings, he rested a paw across its back, as though keeping the duck close helped him keep a part of himself, too. He didn't chase anymore, didn't tug or wrestle or fetch. But he dreamed, soft kicks in the night, quiet huffs of breath, a twitch of his tail, now almost always still. Eliza's mother would watch him, hand to her mouth, wondering what memories drifted past him as he dozed. It was a Tuesday, gentle and blue-skied, when he didn't get up. The world outside was all birdsong and sunbeams, a canvas painted with perfect ease. Eliza had returned for a visit the night before, staying a little later than she'd planned. She found him by the window in the morning, feathers tucked beneath his chin. His breathing was light. His eyes opened when she sat beside him. Not wide, but present. Recognizing. He didn't lift his head. He didn't need to. Eliza placed a hand on his paw, her fingers trembling just slightly. The house was quiet, as if even the walls were waiting. "I'm here," she whispered. He didn't wag, just breathed. And then, slowly, like the closing of a much-loved book, his chest lifted once more. And settled. No noise, no whimpers, no final effort, just stillness. Eliza sat with him for a long time. She didn't cry, not right away. She kept her hand on his paw, pressed her cheek to his side, listened to the silence as if it might change shape. Outside, a single violet bent under the weight of a breeze. Inside, feathers rested against golden fur, unmoving. And Humphrey, collector of toys, keeper of corners, guardian of something quietly sacred, was gone. But he'd left no mess. Only a memory. And a duck who didn't need eyes or wings to know exactly where he belonged. The house felt different. The quiet that followed was not the hush of peace, but the echo of absence. The kind that crept in quietly, dusting corners with stillness and pressing gently against the air. For a time, no one touched the toy box. It sat beneath the window, half open, the way Humphrey had always left it. Feathers remained inside, carefully placed, not at the very top, not buried beneath others, just where it should be. Mrs. Bennet vacuumed around it, leaving an untouched circle of carpet where the box rested. Mr. Bennet passed it with his coffee each morning, pausing without reason. Eliza visited often in those early months. The house always smelled faintly of memory, cedar, candle wax, fur caught in old blankets. Finally, after a snowfall that clung too long into March, someone decided, we should donate them. A cardboard box appeared. The toys were lifted one by one, gently, like artifacts from a time only dogs understood. Some squeaked. Some flopped. Some were limp with age and love. When the box was full, Mr. Bennet loaded it into the car. Eliza rode with him, her fingers curled in her lap, quiet all the way to the shelter. They explained upon arrival. These were our old dogs, Eliza said. He passed recently. The worker nodded kindly. We're always grateful. In the back, the toys were sorted. Some were cleaned, others discarded, but a handful, well-loved, but whole, were moved to the main room, where excited barks bounced from every corner. And that's when it happened. Some toys vanished within minutes. A cheerful pup grabbed the rope and bolted into a corner. Another shredded the plush sunflower like a hunter finally claiming prey. But 3 toys remained untouched. Feathers was among them. Placed gently beside a clean blanket, it sat perfectly still, no different from the others. No brighter, no newer, just there. Dogs sniffed it, tilted their heads, moved on. One even sat beside it for a time, then got up and fetched a rubber bone instead. A volunteer returned to Eliza a few days later, box half empty. It's the oddest thing, she said. These toys aren't being taken. Some dogs avoid them entirely. Like they've already been picked. Eliza stared into the box. Her fingers brushed against Feathers, slow and deliberate. She didn't take him back. She just smiled gently. Maybe they have. The volunteer raised an eyebrow. Meaning? Some toys, Eliza said, still smell like love. That night, back at the house, the toy box was returned to its place beneath the window. Not full, not empty. Waiting. It was a rainy afternoon in late October when Eliza walked into the shelter. She hadn't meant to go in. The plan had been groceries. Flour, eggs, maybe a bouquet of whatever flowers hadn't wilted yet in the cold. But the rain came sudden and heavy, and the shelter's awning had a bench just dry enough to pause beneath. And from inside the glass doors, eyes watched. Warm brown, still, patient. She didn't notice him at first. Not until she turned to leave and the world tilted, just a little, as though the silence behind her had shape. He didn't bark. He didn't jump. He just sat, tawny, with darker ears and long lashes that made him look thoughtful, even when still. He had a long body and quietly folded paws. Like he'd been waiting, but not with urgency. More like with faith. A volunteer was unlocking the door. You can come in, she said. They don't mind strangers. Eliza hesitated, then stepped through the threshold as if answering a question she hadn't heard. Inside, it smelled faintly of shampoo, wet concrete, and something softer beneath it. Expectation, maybe. The pup didn't rush her. She crouched slowly, holding her palm toward him the way someone might hold out a piece of paper already filled with memories. And he licked it, once. Lightly, like punctuation. The name came later, accidental and quiet. The kind of name that doesn't need choosing, only uncovering. Leo. It felt right. Not grand, not poetic, just solid and full of breath. She brought him home that same week. Her house was small, 2 bedrooms, a Friday night couch, and a garden that tried its best to bloom. There were empty spots where art belonged and a coat rack that leaned left. But when Leo stepped inside, he stopped once in the doorway, sniffed the carpet, then moved as if he'd always known the layout. He didn't run, didn't whine. He simply followed her to the kitchen, then to the living room, then found a place between the armchair and heater where the shadows fell gently. Eliza bought new toys. A plush fox. A braided tug rope. A squeaky dice that made too much noise in the evening. Leo inspected them each. Polite. Curious. But none held him. Until December. A package came from her parents, one among many filled with old scarves, faded photo albums, and hand-me-down platters she kept promising to use. At the bottom, a wooden box. Pressed with brass corners, the lid still slightly warped. She recognized it instantly, though her heart didn't move until she opened it. And there, still soft, still slumped, still green in that memory-worn way, was Feathers. She didn't call Leo over. He came without asking, sat beside her, looked into the box, tilted his head once, then reached in with his mouth, curled his teeth around Feathers like a whisper, and carried it, gently, unshaken, to the patch of sun near the window. And there, he laid it down, then curled beside it, not like he'd found a toy, but like he'd found something long lost. Eliza stared for a long time. Her fingers pressed to her lips, her breath caught on the edge between wonder and ache. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Some stories don't begin. They continue. The toy box sat quietly in the corner of the living room, its wood dulled with age, brass edges worn to softness. Eliza hadn't meant to keep it, but when her parents downsized and the house on Appleseed Lane passed into someone else's hands, it had arrived among the other memory-laden boxes, unlabeled, but unmistakable. She hadn't opened it right away. It had arrived in early January, that quiet stretch after holidays, when snow clung in the corners of every street and the hours between dusk and sleep grew longer. The box sat unopened for days, covered with mail and a forgotten scarf. But Leo noticed it. He'd sit near it sometimes, not tense, not whining, just close. Like a dog resting beside something familiar he couldn't quite place. One night, while tea steeped and wind rattled hollowly through the mail slot, Eliza knelt and brushed the dust off the lid. It opened with a soft groan of old hinges. Leo padded over immediately. He didn't dive in, didn't paw at the contents. He only looked. Quiet, intent. Inside, a handful of toys slept as if nothing had changed. The plush sunflower, faded and lopsided. The rope toy, frayed and faintly scented of dust. And near the top, still bearing the gentle bend of years spent tucked beneath a chin, was Feathers. Eliza hesitated. The duck looked smaller now, though maybe that was memory tricking the eye. One wing hung slightly limp. The old repair thread had come loose in places. The button eyes were gone, replaced by soft impressions. Leo looked up at her, then back at the duck. He reached in, no pause, no sniffing, and picked up Feathers with practiced care. As if he'd done it before. He turned and, without ceremony, carried it across the room to the patch of gold where morning light made its brief appearance even in winter. He placed it down gently, pressed his nose to its soft side, then curled beside it, his tail circling just so, eyes blinking half closed. Eliza didn't move. The tea steeped too long. A log in the fireplace shifted, sending a tiny cascade of ash dancing upward. Outside, snow began again, slow and unbothered. Inside, she watched Leo letting out one long breath, and she realized he hadn't merely found a toy. He had found something that otherwise would be forgotten. She crossed the room slowly, settled down beside him, and placed her hand on his back. He didn't stir, and Feathers, worn and silent, looked exactly the way it always had, threadbare and beloved, resting beside the dog who chose it. Or maybe remembered it. Eliza didn't know if this was magic or memory, destiny or deep instinct. She only knew it felt like home had circled back to her unexpectedly. Like some part of a map she'd thought was lost had quietly redrawn itself overnight. She whispered, almost without sound, "Welcome," though she wasn't sure who she was saying it to. Leo didn't reply. He didn't need to. People say dogs don't remember past lives. That each one arrives as blank as snow, learning everything from scratch, stares, kindness, storms. They say memory belongs to people, and instinct belongs to animals. But they never watched Leo. Not the way he paused beside Feathers, eyes soft, body still. Not the way he carried it, not clumsily, not with mouthplay, but with a gentle grip that knew dents and creases, knew where the stuffing sagged most, knew what spots not to disturb. Some afternoons he'd sit by the window, Feathers tucked beneath his chin, and Eliza would swear, for the briefest moment, that she'd slipped back into the house on Appleseed Lane. Could feel the faint heat of its hardwood floors, smell the old cedar threads in the air. Hear the quiet murmur of a golden retriever's sigh as the wind danced in ivy above the sill. Memory, it seemed, did not always sit in the mind. Sometimes, it curled behind ribs or hid in paws, or settled deep in a round green duck who had seen snow fall a dozen times, and still waited, patient as ever, for the right dog to return. Leo had never been trained to be so careful. Eliza had never told him, "This one is special," never pulled Feathers from the box and offered it with ceremony. There had been no introduction. There had only been a knowing. One afternoon, an old friend visited, someone who had known the Bennett house well, someone who had once fed Humphrey slices of apple under the table when no one was looking. They spotted Feathers from across the room and laughed softly. "No way," they said. "That thing's still around?" Leo lifted his head, watched quietly from where he lay. Didn't blink. The friend chuckled again, less certain this time. Eliza glanced at Leo, then back at the duck, then said, "It's the same one." "I think." "You're sure?" Eliza didn't answer. Because what could be said? That some fabric endures beyond logic? That thread and stuffing carry the hush of footsteps long vanished? That maybe the world is stitched with more than just sense, maybe it's stitched with soul? The friend didn't ask more. Leo returned to stillness, laid his head down again. Eliza watched him, and behind her eyes bloomed the smallest flicker of a thought she'd never dared say out loud. What if love leaves an imprint? Not in skin, not in name, but in weight, in quiet, in the pause before curling against something you don't remember choosing but would never let go. By the window, the same breeze pressed faintly against the glass. The duck did not move. And the dog who wasn't supposed to remember kept remembering anyway. They ask about it sometimes. Guests, mostly, the kind who notice quiet things. A friend over for tea. A neighbor dropping off borrowed books. They'll pause near the window where the light lingers longest and tilt their head. "That green duck," they say. "Doesn't your dog ever chew it up?" Eliza always smiles, not with her mouth, but with her whole face. The kind of smile built from old songs and long walks and something too gentle to name. "No," she says, and it's true. Leo never chewed Feathers, never squeaked it, never shook it by the neck with a puppy's careless delight. He'd carry it sometimes, yes, pressed against his chest like a heartbeat he didn't want to wake up. But never with teeth, never with destruction. It rests now in the same corner it always has. Near the window, tucked where shadows gather in the afternoons and sun stretches out slowly, like warm fingers across the floor. The spot seems made for it. Memory shaped. History held. Eliza tried to move it once. Just an inch to the left to dust beneath. That evening, it had returned to its place. Leo standing nearby, as if to say, I didn't put it back, not exactly, but maybe something did. Over time, she stopped questioning. Because some toys, some moments, don't invite questions. They only ask to be witnessed. Even when Leo grows older, slower, heavier in his bones, the duck remains untouched. Not because of rules, but because of reverence. It's not sacred by design, not marked or crowned. It's sacred because it was chosen. Because when love reaches deep enough, it roots. Deeper than the mind, beyond recall, into something older, wordless. Sometimes, Eliza forgets it's there. Days pass. She sweeps. She reads. She writes down grocery lists and buttons coats and laughs with people who never knew Humphrey, who never knew Appleseed Lane. And then, something pulls her glance to the floor. To that duck. Frayed, faded, familiar. Still there. Still waiting. Not for someone, necessarily. But simply because it was once chosen with such gentleness that the choosing never stopped echoing. She doesn't always speak of it. Only when the house is quiet, and Leo lies dreaming nearby, his paws twitching like he's running paths only he remembers. Then, maybe, she'll whisper, to the featherless duck, to the breeze behind the curtains, to memory itself. Some toys aren't just toys. Some toys are maps. And some dogs, remember where the map began. The first time Leo dreamed with sound, Eliza was reading on the couch. The rain tapped gently on the roof, a lullaby of silver thuds, and Leo, curled beside the fireplace, jerked in his sleep. Not violently, but with rhythm, a paw flick, then another, and then they heard it. A small, short woof. It escaped like breath from a place too deep to cage. His nose twitched, ears quivered, not in fear, but in memory. Eliza closed her book, listening. Another quiet bark tumbled out, softer than the first. Then he sighed, long and low, like someone remembering a joke he'd once nearly forgotten. The duck was beneath his chin. She hadn't noticed him pick it up that day. He hadn't touched it in days, maybe a week. But there it was again, cradled between his front legs, the same way Humphrey used to hold it. The same curve in his spine. The same tuck of tail. And the strangest part, it didn't feel like imitation. It felt like recurrence. The rain thickened, drawing shadows across the walls. The fire cracked. Leo's breaths deepened. Eliza reached for her phone to take a picture, an old habit from childhood, but her hand stopped. Some things weren't meant to be captured, only remembered. The next morning, Leo sat at the window long before breakfast. Not staring out, but down. At feathers. He pawed it lightly, adjusted it, barely an inch. Then curled beside it again, back against the wooden floor. The same spot where, long ago, another golden dog used to sleep facing east, waiting for sun, or a girl, or both. Eliza made coffee slowly, stared from the kitchen. The morning light was pale, dusted with mist, and in that quiet, something felt off-kilter, not unbalanced, but shifted. Like a door in her heart had been left ajar. That afternoon, she pulled out a storage bin from the hall closet. Inside were toys from years past, the squeaky pig, still faintly squeaky, a twine rope toy with one handle chewed to fringe, the plush dinosaur whose smile had long since frayed. She placed them near the toy box from Appleseed Lane, unsure what she expected. Leo came when he heard her kneel. No hurry, no tail-thumping joy. Just slow steps. curious eyes. He sniffed each toy without urgency. The pig, the rope, the dinosaur. His mouth passed over them all. Then he turned back to Feathers, nudged it gently, and lay down. Later that night, Eliza stepped outside, mug steaming in her hands, knees aching just slightly from a day of kneeling, lifting, sorting. And she laughed, not loud, not wild. Just a soft chuckle, like discovering a familiar melody in an unfamiliar place. Because for all the toys she'd saved, for all the memories she thought she'd curated, the truth had been simple. None of it needed remembering. Feathers still remembered for them. And Leo? He had never once forgotten. The first snow of the year came without warning, dry and powdery, like sifted sugar shaken from a quiet sky. Eliza hadn't expected it. The forecast had sworn on clear skies and stubborn temperatures, but by evening, the world outside her window had turned pale and silent. Inside, Leo was restless. Not anxious. Not afraid. Restless the way a person might feel when they've left the stove on in a house they haven't lived in for years. He paced once, twice. Circled the toy box, nudged it with his nose, then turned and stared at the front door. Eliza watched from her armchair, mug nestled between her palms, the glow of a lamp pooling warm around her knees. "What is it, boy?" she asked. He didn't bark. He just stood still, ears halfway raised. Then, without command, without coaxing, he walked to the window, the one in the corner where Feathers always lay. The duck wasn't there. Not dropped. Not misplaced. Simply absent. Eliza blinked, put down the mug, scanned the living room. 2 steps brought her to the toy box. She sifted gently. The rope toy. The plush sunflower, decades old. The dinosaur. But no duck. "Leo," she said slowly. He was still at the window, one paw lifted like he meant to move, but didn't know how. She checked the hallway, the kitchen, beneath the couch. Nothing. Until, in the guest room, caught in the low light beneath the dresser, sat Feathers. Alone. Upright, almost like it had chosen its own resting place. She reached down, meaning to retrieve it, but paused. The air felt too still. Eliza knelt instead, watched quietly, and that's when Leo arrived. He hadn't followed her, had simply known. Paws light against the hardwood, he appeared beside her, gaze focused on that worn green shape. He lowered his head to Eliza's knee, brushing his muzzle once against her hand, then slipped past her fearlessly, gently nosed the duck from under the dresser, and took it in his mouth. He didn't turn to leave. He didn't head toward the living room. He walked to the center of the guest room rug, placed it there, and sat. Eliza followed. The room had once been her childhood bedroom, repainted and forgotten. She hadn't walked into it more than twice that year. But Leo sat now in the center, the duck between his paws, and wouldn't move. She sank to the floor beside him, back against the old bookcase. Something creaked above, a floorboard, the roof reacting to snow weight, or perhaps nothing at all. Leo blinked slowly, breath even, tail twitching once. It wasn't the duck he was guarding. It was the memory the duck belonged to. After a long while, he lay down. And in the hush of snowfall, Eliza realized he hadn't searched for Feathers. He had known exactly where to find it. As though some echo inside him had whispered the path. Not forward, but back. The nights grew longer, and the air wrapped tighter around the house, like the quiet at the end of a song. December deepened in earnest. Lights draped themselves gently over doorways, and candles flickered in windows as though each flame held a hope it dared not speak aloud. Inside the house, Leo had begun to slow. Not drastically, not painfully, but the same way pages yellow, unnoticed, until they are. He rested more, climbed the stairs with pauses. Sometimes needed help onto the couch, where once he'd flown like breath. Eliza noticed. She began dusting less, cleaning around the toys instead of lifting them. She cooked meals that filled the house with warmth she couldn't quite consume. And some evenings she sat for long hours near the fire, Leo's head on her foot, feathers nearby. It was, in its quiet way, familiar. Like revisiting an old book where the words feel heavier, having been read before. One morning, a soft mist clung to the windows. Leo lay in his usual place, muzzle white around the edges like moon-washed bark. Feathers was beneath one paw, just barely. Eliza brewed tea, started to make breakfast, then stopped. Because Leo lifted his head and looked at her. Not with need, not with pain, just with presence. Overflowing, silent presence. He stood with effort, stretched, nudged Feathers until it settled just so, centered between them, and sat. Eliza came to him, knelt without question. He placed a paw on her knee. And everything stilled. It wasn't an ending, but it was a reminder. Later that day, when cousins arrived, bringing sugar cookies and too many scarves, they laughed and chatted and offered Leo a plush candy cane that squeaked like wind through reeds. He sniffed it kindly, then padded to the toy box and selected something older, a floppy bear with one velvet ear missing. He carried it with reverence, as if to say, "I remember this. I remember more than you know." That night, he lay beside Feathers without touching it. Just near, aligned, like old stars drawn back into orbit. Eliza didn't sleep much, not out of fear, but reverence. She stayed near, a book on her lap never turned past the first page. Close to dawn, Leo shifted. Pressed his nose once to the duck's side. Then, without sound, closed his eyes. When the light came in, pale and peach-hued, he was still breathing, slow and even. The duck, unmoved, held its place. Eliza whispered, "Okay," even though he hadn't asked permission. Even though he likely already knew. Because some partings begin long before anyone says goodbye. Some endings aren't endings. Just gates. Just new corners in a house made of remembering. It took Eliza several days to realize what had changed. The toys remained, Feathers still under the window, the plush bear folded beside the hearth. Leo still curled near them, asleep more often than awake. But there was a hush to it all. A kind of reverence in the quiet that hadn't been there before. Not loss. Not yet. Just the breath before. She watched him sometimes, notebook balanced in her lap, pen idle. She'd meant to write, something about the seasons, about waiting, but the words never came. Just silence wrapped in the weight of watching someone remember things you never told them. One afternoon, a letter arrived from her father. Not typed, not formal, just a few lines in his familiar cursive. "Do you think they come back to us?" he wrote. "Not as ghosts, but as companions. Again and again, until we remember the same things together?" She didn't answer. Just read it twice, then set it beside Feathers on the windowsill. Leo sniffed the page once, then lowered his head onto his paws. Later that week, it snowed again. Thicker this time, more deliberate. Eliza lit a single candle and left it near the window. Not for magic. Just tradition. Something she didn't name aloud. As daylight faded, Leo rose softly from his bed, walked to the toy box one last time, and nudged it open. His paw moved slowly across the edge. He didn't take out a toy. Didn't choose. He simply stood there, eyes half-lidded, breath steady. Eliza came to him. She didn't speak. Just knelt beside him, the same way she once had beside another golden dog in another house. The same pressure in her throat. Leo turned, touched his nose gently to her hand, then walked back to his place near the window. Feathers was waiting. He settled beside it, his flank brushing the aged plush as though refinding something he'd never quite lost. And for a short while, an hour, maybe two, Eliza sat beside him, quietly reading from an old book she hadn't opened in years. Her voice wavered at first, then steadied. Leo's breaths fell in time with hers. Outside, snowfall muted every sound. The world seemed paused beneath frost. And there, in that small, golden-lit room, dog and woman remained, guarding something not defined by time or speech, but by presence. By choice. By memory in its gentlest form. Snowdrops bloomed early that year. Tiny, stubborn flowers that refused to wait until the world was ready. They pierced the frost like promises, frail, quiet, but unwavering. Leo was gone, not with noise, not with pain, just like the last snowfall, one morning, simply no longer there. His bed remained undisturbed for days. Eliza couldn't bring herself to move it. And Feathers, still waited by the window. Threadbare as always, uneven wing folded beneath its shape. Eliza thought, briefly, about tucking it away. Into a keepsake box. Onto a shelf. But something stopped her. Instead, she sat beside it the following morning with a cup of tea she didn't finish. Held the duck in her lap like one might cradle a photograph too fragile to frame. It didn't speak, didn't shimmer in the light. But somehow, her hands remembered the exact way it used to settle beneath another dog's chin. 2 dogs now, 2 lifetimes, maybe more, and suddenly she understood. Feathers would not be boxed away. Not given to another dog. Not passed down. It had already done its part. So she returned it to the window. Back to the corner rubbed smooth by years of pause and waiting. Let it be. The silence in the house shifted after that. It stopped echoing. It felt full, not with noise or presence, but with something warm that filled out the corners like morning light on a cold floor. Sometimes, a breeze would lift the curtains just so. And Feathers would twitch, barely. She told herself it was the draft. Sometimes she believed it. Other times, she would return from errands and find the duck turned ever so slightly. Not displaced. Not moved far. Just adjusted, as if repositioned by memory. Or something older. Years passed. Other dogs came. Old friends. Foster pups between homes. 1 or 2 lingered a season or 2. They all saw Feathers. None touched it. One, a quiet mutt with eyes far too knowing for 9 weeks of life, once sat beside it for an hour without moving. Just sat, then walked away. There came a night when Eliza, now lined at the corners, dusted near the baseboards and leaned down without thinking to move the duck. But her hand hesitated. She looked at it for a long time. Then whispered, so faintly the room barely heard. Not yet. Maybe never. Because some echoes aren't meant to fade. Some pawprints don't wash away with rain. They stay, soft, invisible, thread deep. Years later, a child asked her, "Why don't you throw that old toy out?" She smiled, brushing silver hair from her brow, and answered, "Because someone's still using it." And the child, who didn't understand, but understood enough, nodded. That day, they didn't ask again. They simply sat near the window. In the corner. Where the sun always found its way back. Right beside Feathers. Still faithful. Still remembering.